Mira lived on a small world at the edge of the galaxy. The planet was not rich, not famous, and not beautiful. It was dry most of the year, with cracked ground and dust storms that often covered the sky. People said it was a forgotten place, left behind when greater powers of the galaxy moved on to brighter worlds. Yet for Mira, this little world was home. She lived in a village built from stone and wood, surrounded by thin fields where her people grew food with hard work. Every day was a struggle. The soil gave little, and the rains came late or not at all. Yet the people survived. They had survived for many generations. They built simple homes, they cared for each other, and they endured. Mira was seen as only a farm girl. She was small, thin, and quiet. Her hair was dark and always messy from the wind, and her clothes were worn from use. Most people thought she was no different from anyone else in the village. She carried water, tended animals, and worked in the fields. To strangers, there was nothing special about her, but Mira had something no one else had. Hidden in a wooden chest under her bed was an old book. The cover was torn, the pages yellow, but the words inside were alive. It was a history of humankind. It spoke of explorers who crossed oceans, inventors who built machines, and dreamers who reached for the stars. Mira read it again and again by candlelight when others slept. The book told of courage, of strength, and of clever minds that shaped worlds. It spoke of great journeys across space, when humans left their first home to walk on distant planets. To Mira, these stories were not only history, they were lessons. They told her that her people were not weak, even if they looked small and forgotten now. They told her that humanity could always rise again. She often wondered why she had the book at all. It had been given to her by her grandmother before she passed away. Her grandmother had whispered, "Keep it safe, Mira. One day it will matter." Mira had been too young to understand then, but as she grew older, she felt the weight of those words. The village did not understand her love for the book. They cared about food, water, and daily survival. They thought stories were only stories. Some even told her that looking to the past was useless because the past could not feed them. Mira never argued with them. She kept her thoughts inside, but her heart carried the fire of the book's words. Sometimes, when the night was clear, Mira would climb the hill outside the village and stare at the stars. The sky was wide and endless. She would whisper the names of ships and explorers she had read about. She would imagine herself walking among those stars, carrying the spirit of her people with her. Life in the village was simple, but not peaceful. Bandits sometimes raided from the desert. Wild beasts sometimes came down from the hills. The people always fought to hold on to what little they had. Mira helped when she could. She was not strong, but she was quick and clever. She found ways to trick animals away from the fields or to hide food from bandits. Yet still, most thought of her as only a girl who dreamed too much. The truth was that Mira did not mind being unseen. She liked to move quietly. She liked to learn without being noticed. Her heart told her that one day, the galaxy itself would look down on her and think she was nothing. That thought did not make her afraid. It made her smile, because she believed the galaxy was wrong. On her 16th birthday, Mira sat alone in her small room with the old book on her lap. She turned, the pages slowly reading words she already knew by heart. But that night she felt something different. She felt as if the voices of the past were speaking directly to her. They said, "You are human. That means you are never powerless." Mira closed the book and placed it back in its chest. She blew out her candle and lay down to sleep. The wind howled outside, carrying dust against the walls of her home. She closed her eyes, but her mind was full of stars. She dreamed of journeys, of battles, of victories. She dreamed of a future where her name would not be forgotten. No one in the village knew what Mira carried inside her heart. No one knew that she would one day rise beyond the fields and the dust. The galaxy would look at her and think she was nothing, But Mira would prove them wrong. The summer sun had just begun to fall behind the hills when the sky above the village changed. At first, people thought it was a storm. Dark shapes moved through the clouds, blocking out the fading light. But then the shapes grew larger, sharper, and brighter. They were not clouds, they were ships. Mira stood in the fields with a basket of grain when she saw them. Her heart froze. She had read of ships in her book, though most were human ships of long ago. These ships were nothing like that. They were smooth, shining like silver stone, with long wings that curved like blades. The sound that came with them was a deep hum, heavy enough to shake the ground. The villagers gathered in the square as the ships lowered. The air became hot, dust rose, and the sound grew so strong it hurt the ears. The children clung to their parents. The elders whispered prayers. Mira stood at the edge of the crowd, staring without blinking. She knew this was the moment her grandmother had spoken of. The day when the outside galaxy would remember their forgotten world had come. With a hiss of air, the largest ship opened. From it stepped tall figures in silver armor. Their skin was pale blue, their eyes narrow and glowing faintly. They were the Veylan, a people of strength and pride. To them, humans were only workers, simple creatures fit to serve. The leader of the Veylan spoke in a deep voice, words rolling like thunder. This world now belongs to the Veylan Empire. You will provide food, metal, and labor. Refusal is not allowed. Your lives continue only if you obey. Fear spread through the villagers. Some bowed at once. Others hid their faces. A few tried to argue, but their voices broke under the cold stares of the aliens. The Veylan moved, with calm power, as if they already owned everything they saw. Mira clenched her fists. She remembered lines from her book. When humans faced empires greater than themselves, they did not bow. They endured, they resisted, and they rose again. Yet she said nothing. Not yet. The Veylan began to take what they wanted. They ordered the villagers to bring grain, water, and animals. They placed strange machines around the square, glowing with red light, marking the land as theirs. A group of them walked through the homes, searching and taking tools or wood. They acted as if the humans were invisible, as if their fear was nothing. Mira's father pulled her back toward their home. "Do not draw their eyes," he whispered. "Do not give them reason to notice you." But Mira could not stop watching. She saw how the Veylan moved, how their weapons shone at their belts, how their ships rested on wide legs like sleeping beasts. She studied everything. That night the village was silent. Fires burned low. Families gathered close, speaking little. The Veylan kept guards in the square, their glowing eyes scanning the streets. Every step they took echoed through the still air. Mira sat awake with her book open on her lap. She read by the light of a small flame. Her father and mother slept nearby, exhausted from fear and work. Mira's eyes stayed fixed on the words. The stories spoke of battles against odds, of people who stood tall when others expected them to. Kneel. She thought of the way the Veylan had looked at her people. To them, humans were weak, broken, and small. They thought humans would never rise. The galaxy thought she would lower her head like the rest. But Mira's heart burned against that thought. The next morning, the Veylan forced the villagers to work. They ordered men and women to carry crates, lift metal parts, and dig holes for their machines. The aliens stood over them, silent, watching every move. If someone slowed, a Veylan raised a hand, and the glowing eyes alone were enough to drive the person faster. Mira was placed with a group of younger villagers to carry baskets of water from the well. The work was tiring, but what filled her mind was not the pain. She watched the guards, their weapons, their ships. She noticed how one ship leaked smoke at the side. She noticed how another Veylan seemed to check a wrist device again and again, as if it was not working well. She whispered to her friend Aaron, "They are not perfect. Their machines can break." Aaron shook his head quickly. "Do not speak of that. If they hear you, we are finished." Mira said no more, but in her heart, she held to her thought. They could break. That evening, the Veylan leader returned to the square. He spoke again, telling the people that every week they must deliver food and materials. If they failed, punishment would follow. He looked at the crowd with eyes that glowed brighter, daring anyone to resist. None did, except Mira. She did not move or bow. She stood at the back of the crowd, her eyes locked on him. She did not speak, but her silence was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of a challenge. For a brief moment, the leader's eyes passed over her. He saw only a thin, human girl with dust on her clothes. He looked away at once, not giving her another thought. Mira almost smiled. That was his mistake. That was the galaxy's mistake. When night came again, she sat by her window and stared at the glowing lights of the alien machines. She whispered to herself, "You think we are weak. You think we will serve, but you are wrong." The wind carried her words into the dark, and above her, the stars shone like silent witnesses. The arrival of strangers had changed everything. The people feared. The Veylan ruled. But in the heart of one unknown girl, a fire was building. A fire that no empire could see yet, but one that would soon burn bright enough to light the galaxy. The days after the Veylan arrival were heavy with fear. The villagers woke each morning to the sound of alien boots on stone, their glowing eyes sweeping over the people like cold fire. The humans worked under orders, carrying loads, digging, trenches, and hauling supplies. The Veylan gave no thanks, no kindness. To them, humans were tools. Mira worked alongside the others, but her eyes never stopped moving. She noticed every detail, how the guards shifted positions, how the ships released heat when they landed, how the alien machines pulsed with light as if powered by a heart inside. She watched not only with fear, but with purpose. Her book had told her that knowledge was a weapon. Long ago, humans had studied their enemies and found ways to outthink them. Mira believed the same truth still lived in her people. She whispered. To herself, if they bleed, they can fall. If they build, their machines can break. One afternoon, the Veylan brought a large walker into the village square. It was a tall machine with metal legs that bent backward like those of a bird. A glowing crystal sat in its chest, and its arms carried heavy cannons. The villagers gasped at the sight of it. The message was clear. The aliens wanted them to know resistance was hopeless. Mira, however, felt something different. Her heart raced not with fear, but with curiosity. She studied how the machine stepped, how its joints hissed with steam, and how its crystal pulsed brighter when it moved faster. That night, when the guards grew lazy and the village slept, Mira slipped quietly out of her home. She kept to the shadows, moving like the wind between houses, until she reached the edge of the square. The walker stood silent, its tall frame blocking the moonlight. Mira crouched low and waited. 2 guards walked past, speaking in their strange language, then moved on. When they were gone, she crept closer. Her hands trembled, but she pressed them against the cold metal of the walker. Up close, she could see small pipes, wires, and panels along its legs. She touched one, finding it loose. Her mind worked quickly. She had no weapon, no great strength, but she had her knowledge. She pulled a small tool from her belt, a simple hook she had used in the fields. With care, she pressed it into the opening and twisted. A faint hiss escaped and steam spilled out. She froze, waiting to see if alarms would sound, but none came. Her courage grew. She worked at another pipe, loosening it. Slowly, she opened a panel and saw glowing wires inside. They pulsed like veins. She remembered a line from her book. Even the mightiest machines are undone by the smallest fault. Mira pulled one wire loose and tucked it aside. The glow dimmed slightly, then steadied again. She knew she had done enough. She closed the panel and slipped back into the shadows, her breath racing. The next day, the Veylan activated the walker before the crowd. They wanted to show their power. Again. The machine rose, its legs hissing, its arms lifting. But as it took its second step, a loud crack split the air. The left leg buckled. The walker lurched forward, sparks bursting from its chest. With a deafening crash, it fell to the ground, shaking the earth. The villagers gasped. Some screamed and ran, thinking the machine was about to fire. But no fire came. Instead, smoke poured from the broken walker. The Veylan shouted to each other, in anger, rushing to the wreck. They struck the machine with their fists, trying to restart it, but it lay dead. Among the crowd, Mira kept her face calm. She stood small, like all the others, but inside her heart leapt with triumph. She had seen what no one else had seen, that power could fall. The villagers whispered to each other in the fields that evening. "Did you see it? The mighty machine failed." Others nodded, though their voices stayed low, afraid the aliens would hear. Still, a spark had been lit. Mira felt it when her friend Aaron walked beside her. He whispered, "Machines of the stars, and yet they fall. Perhaps they are not gods." Mira gave no answer. She only looked at him, and her eyes told the truth. That night, she returned to her book. She read the words of explorers who faced storms, soldiers who fought with nothing but courage, and builders who turned scraps into wonders. She whispered, to herself, "The galaxy thinks we are small, but they do not know the strength of our fire." The next morning, Mira noticed something new. The villagers worked with more energy. Their backs were still bent, their hands still dirty, but their eyes held a flicker of light. The fall of the walker had planted a seed of hope. The Veylan did not see it. They shouted more, forced harder work, and brought more guards. They thought fear had returned, but they were blind to the quiet glances humans now shared, the tiny nods of courage that passed between them. Mira smiled as she carried her basket of water. She knew this was only the beginning. A single spark, no matter how small, could grow into fire, and fire could spread faster than any empire could control. The galaxy thought she would be silent, that she would bow like the others. But Mira had chosen another path. She had begun it with a single act, hidden in the dark, when no one believed change was possible. The fall of the walker had changed something in the village. It was a small change, invisible to the Veylan, but Mira could feel it every day. The air no longer held only fear. There was something else now, a quiet strength, a thought that whispered. In every mind, the aliens were not untouchable. The Veylan, however, believed nothing had changed. They ordered the villagers to work harder. They demanded more food, more supplies, and more hours of labor. Their glowing eyes scanned the humans, without emotion. They thought the people were still broken, still afraid. But Mira noticed how her people had begun to move differently. When the guards looked away, villagers exchanged small nods. When they carried baskets of water or sacks of grain, they did, it with straighter backs. The spark of courage she had lit in the dark was slowly spreading. One evening, as the people gathered around the fires to eat, Mira stood up. The flames lit her face, and the eyes of the villagers turned to her. She had never spoken before the whole group, but now her voice rose with steady calm. "Do you remember," she began, "the stories of our past? Do you remember that we were not always like this, bent and silent? Our ancestors crossed seas with wooden ships. They built cities from stone and metal. They left their first home and reached for the stars. They faced empires greater than the Veylan, and still they rose. The villagers listened in silence. Some frowned, afraid of her words, but others leaned closer, their eyes wide. "They believe we are weak," Mira continued. "They believe we will always serve. But I tell you this, they do not know us. They do not know the strength of humans. We bend, yes, but we do not break. We fall, but we rise again. That is who we are." Her father looked at her with worry, whispering for her to sit. But Mira did not stop. Her voice grew stronger, carrying through the crowd. "They think they own this world, but this world is ours. The ground we walk, the fields we grow, the homes we build, these are ours. They cannot take from us what we choose to guard in our hearts. They cannot take our courage." For a long moment, silence followed. The fire crackled. The Veylan were not near, yet still the villagers glanced toward the shadows, fearful of being overheard. But then Arun, Mira's friend, lifted his head. "She speaks the truth," he said. "I saw their machine fall. I saw their surprise. If they can be surprised, they can be defeated." A murmur spread through the crowd, heads nodded, eyes lit with quiet fire. For the first time in many years, hope walked among them. From that night on, Mira's words became whispers in the fields and alleys. Children repeated them as they played. Elders repeated them as they worked. Even those who feared the Veylan most could not deny the power in her voice. Mira did not stop with one speech. Each evening, when the guards grew bored and the people gathered, she told another story. She told of explorers who mapped the stars, of inventors who made fire into light, of fighters who stood against armies with nothing but will. Her words were simple, but they carried the weight of history. "The galaxy thinks we are small," she said one night. "But small things can grow. A single seed becomes a forest. A single flame becomes a fire. A single voice becomes many." The villagers began to act, not with open rebellion, not yet, but in small ways. A worker would move slowly, delaying the aliens' tasks. A farmer would hide part of the harvest before handing it over. Tools were misplaced, signals were passed, guards were misled. Tiny acts, invisible to the Veylan, but known to the humans. Mira became their quiet leader. She did not command, but her words guided. She gave them courage where fear had lived. She gave them belief where despair had ruled. The Veylan began to sense unrest. Their leader noticed that the villagers' eyes no longer stayed down as long as before. He noticed small delays, mistakes, and missing supplies. He barked orders, increased patrols, and punished those who seemed slow. But still, resistance grew, hidden beneath the surface like roots beneath the soil. One day, a guard shouted at a young boy for spilling water. The boy trembled, but Mira stepped forward. She bowed slightly, pretending respect, but her voice carried strength. "He is young," she said. "He meant no harm. Blame me instead." The guard stared at her glowing-eyed, confused by her boldness. He pushed her aside and walked away. The villagers whispered afterward, amazed at her courage. Mira's act showed them that even in the open, one could stand without breaking. That night, she spoke again to the people. "They do not see us because they do not believe we matter. They think we are shadows, but we are more than shadows. We are the fire waiting to rise." Her words spread farther than she expected. Other villages heard of the girl who spoke of human strength. Messengers carried her words across the desert. Soon people beyond her home began to whisper of her courage. Mira did not seek fame. She did not think of herself as a hero. She only remembered her grandmother's words. One day the book will matter. And now, every night, as she read from its pages, she felt that day had come. Still, she knew Danger was near. The Veylan were not fools. They would not ignore the rising spirit forever. Already she saw them watching more closely. Already she felt their eyes linger on her longer than before. But Mira was not afraid. She told herself, "If they notice me, then it means I have already done what I must. I have given my people their voice back." The spark she had lit in, secret had become a flame, and the flame was spreading, carried by her words, carried by her people. The Veylan thought they ruled the world. They did not yet see that something stronger than fear was rising against them. The village had grown restless. The quiet acts of defiance were no longer enough. Mira could feel the tension in the air. Every footstep of the Veylan echoed like a warning. Every glance from their glowing eyes carried suspicion. They were becoming aware that something had changed. Humans no longer moved as if they were shadows. They moved with purpose, with hope, with fire. One morning, the Veylan commander arrived with a new order. "All leaders of this village will come with us," he said, his voice deep and cold. "Failure to comply will result in punishment for all." The villagers froze. Mira's father and mother looked at her, fear in their eyes. Mira did not flinch. She had expected this moment. She knew the Veylan would try to break the source of the rising courage. She realized the danger was no longer hidden. Before anyone could respond, the guards stormed through the square, grabbing villagers and forcing them to march toward the alien ships. Mira stayed at the back, watching, calculating. Her heart raced. But her mind worked clearly. She could not stop the immediate threat, but she could prepare for the next move. When her turn came, she was seized by two guards and pulled toward the largest ship. The ground shook beneath her feet as the engines hummed. Inside, the ship was cold and bright. Panels of glowing light lined the walls, and the air smelled of metal and power. She was placed in a small cell with thick walls, unable to move freely. Mira sat quietly, listening to the hum of the ship and the occasional footsteps of the guards. She thought of the villagers, of her friends, and of Aaron. Fear tried to creep in, but she pushed it away. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. One day, the book will matter. She understood now that her courage was not only for herself. It was for all those who had begun to believe again. Back in the village, the Veylan forced the people to work harder. They expected that fear would crush the spark that Mira had started. But something unexpected happened. The villagers remembered her words. They remembered the fall of the walker, the stories of human strength, and the small victories hidden in their daily work. Slowly, they began to act. They hid tools, misdirected the Veylan, and delayed the construction of new machines. Small acts, but together they formed a silent rebellion. The Veylan noticed the delays, but they could not see the human spirit that fueled them. They only saw errors. They punished a few, but punishment could not erase courage. Mira, even in her cell, felt the pulse of resistance. She heard the muffled voices of villagers outside, whispering instructions, passing signals, and helping each other. The fire she had lit continued to burn, stronger than any chains or walls. One night, a guard entered her cell. He did not speak, only stood there for a moment, watching. Mira met his gaze, steady and calm. The guard flinched, surprised by her courage. He turned and left. Mira realized something important. Even the Veylan were not immune to fear, hesitation, and doubt. Small acts of defiance could affect them too. While Mira was confined, the villagers devised a plan. Using what they had learned from watching the Veylan, they moved quietly through the village, sabotaging machines and gathering supplies. Their goal was not only survival, but also to free Mira. The night of the plan, the village became a place of shadows and whispers. Fires were dimmed, guards were misled by false paths. Every step was calculated, every movement silent. Mira listened from her cell as the hum of the ship was interrupted by noises from outside. She smiled faintly, understanding what was happening. Suddenly, alarms blared. The Velan had discovered part of the sabotage. Chaos erupted on the ship. Guards ran, shouting commands. Mira seized the moment. Using a small tool she had hidden, she forced the lock of her cell open. The door creaked but held, and she slipped into the hall, moving quickly and silently. She found a narrow maintenance corridor and ran toward the exit, guided by the sounds of her people outside. Sparks flew from damaged panels. The ship shook as humans on the ground sabotaged its engines. Mira felt her heart pound with hope. The impossible was beginning to happen. Outside, the villagers had overpowered a few guards and were moving toward her ship. Aaron was at the front, signaling her to follow. Mira ran to meet him, her body tired, but her spirit stronger than ever. Together, they led the small group of villagers through the chaos. The Velan commander realized too late what was happening. He shouted orders, but his voice was lost in the noise of the damaged machines and the determined humans. The villagers fought with tools, sticks, and sheer will. They had no powerful weapons, but they had courage, and courage carried more weight than any blade. Mira reached the square with her people behind her. The remaining Velan guards were stunned to see humans move as one, fearless and united. Mira raised her hand, and the villagers paused, waiting. She gave a simple nod. Then, with strength that surprised even herself, she led them to the nearest supply carts, using them as shields and tools to push the Velan back. By the time the Velan regrouped, the villagers had gained control of much of the square. Sparks from damaged machines lit the night like stars. Mira looked at her people, their eyes shining with newfound power. They had taken their first step from fear into strength. When the commander finally realized what had happened, it was too late. The humans had driven many guards away. The ship's engines were disabled, and the walker was broken. Mira had been freed, and the spark of resistance had become a wave. The villagers cheered quietly, careful not to attract remaining enemies, but the sound was full of life and triumph. Mira stood among them, not as a girl from a small village, but as a leader, who had reminded them of their own power. She did not smile loudly or boast. She only looked at her people and whispered, "This is only the beginning." The galaxy had thought she would break, that the humans would stay silent and small. But Mira had proven that courage could grow, even in chains, that hope could spread even under the heaviest rule, and that resistance could ignite even when the world seemed most dark. That night, the village slept with a sense of victory in their hearts. The Velan were not gone, but their control was weaker. The people had learned something far greater than fear. They had learned that even the smallest human could rise, and that rising together was unstoppable. Mira returned to her small home, her hands scratched and dirty, her body tired, but her spirit alive. She opened her book and read once more, finding the stories of humans who had faced impossible odds. She whispered softly, "The galaxy thought we would bend. They were wrong. The fire lives." The village had changed forever. The small, hidden spark of hope that Mira had started had grown into a fire that no chains or fear could hold. The Velan had underestimated the humans. They thought humans would serve quietly, that their spirits could be broken with fear and punishment. But the fall of the walker, Mira's courage, and the villagers' rising strength had proven them wrong. Mira knew the fight was far from over. The Velan still had numbers, weapons, and ships. They could crush the village if they acted together. But Mira had learned something even more powerful than strength. The mind of a human, guided by courage, could turn the tide of any battle. She studied the damaged walker in the square. Though its leg was broken, its weapons still glowed faintly. She could see how it worked, how it moved, and how it could be repaired. If she could control it, even partially, it would be a weapon against the Veylan. She shared her plan with Arun and a few trusted villagers. "We can take the walker," she said, pointing to the machine. "We know its weak points. We can use it to force the Veylan to retreat. But we must act together and be clever. We cannot win by strength alone." The villagers listened. Fear still lingered in some eyes, but most nodded. They had seen the impossible happen before, and they knew Mira's plan could work. Every act they had done, every small resistance, had prepared them for this moment. The night came, quiet and full of stars. Mira led a small group to the walker. They had gathered simple tools, ropes, and parts from the village. With careful hands and steady nerves, they repaired what they could, using knowledge from the book Mira always carried. Sparks flew as wires, were connected, and panels were adjusted. The machine groaned, but slowly it stirred to life. Meanwhile, the Veylan grew restless. They had noticed the humans moving with purpose and suspicion. Their commander ordered more patrols and stronger guards, but even with their power, they could not see the minds and hearts of the villagers. They did not understand the quiet fire that had begun in one small girl and now moved through an entire village. Mira climbed onto the walker carefully. Her hands shook, but her mind was clear. Aaron and the others helped guide the controls, following instructions from Mira's observations. The walker's legs moved slowly at first, then stronger. Mira felt a rush of hope. For the first time, humans could stand on equal footing with the Veylan, even if only for a moment. When the Veylan commander arrived to check on his troops, he saw the walker moving. He shouted orders, but the humans had already planned their next steps. They used the walker as a shield, advancing against the remaining guards with courage and clever tactics. The Veylan were taken by surprise. Their machines were powerful, but they had underestimated the humans' mind, unity, and determination. The villagers fought alongside the walker, using ropes, carts, and their own strength. Every action Mira had guided them to take, every lesson from her book, became a tool for survival. Sparks flew, metal clashed, and the air was full of energy. Yet no human lost hope. Every step forward was a step toward freedom. The tide began to turn. The Veylan were forced to retreat from parts of the village. Their ships were damaged by clever traps set by the humans. Small explosions disabled engines. Tools and ropes slowed their advance. Mira's plan worked. She had shown her people that cleverness and courage could defeat even the strongest foe. When the battle slowed, Mira stood on the walker, her hair blowing in the wind. She looked at her people, their faces lit by firelight and hope. They had done what seemed impossible. The Veylan were still strong, but the humans had tasted victory for the first time in a long while. Mira climbed down and joined her friends. They cheered quietly, careful not to attract remaining enemies, but the sound was full of life. Aaron smiled, his eyes bright with pride. "You did it," he said. "We did it together." Mira shook her head. "Not just us," she said. "All of us. The village, the people. We worked as one. That is why we are winning. That is why we will win again." The victory changed more than just the village. Other human settlements heard the news. Messages traveled across deserts and forests, carried by riders and hidden signals. The story of the unknown girl who led her people to turn the tide spread quickly. Humans who had felt powerless began to believe that resistance was possible. Mira knew the fight was far from over. The Veylan would return, stronger, smarter, and more determined. But she also knew something the Veylan could never understand. Courage could not be destroyed by weapons, by fear, or by numbers. It grew, fed by hope, belief, and unity. That night, Mira sat on the hill outside the village, looking at the stars. The walker stood behind her, a symbol of what humans could achieve when they refused to bow. She opened her book and read once, More. Feeling the words lift her spirit, she whispered, "The galaxy thought we were small. They thought we would bend. They were wrong. Humanity will rise." Her people were safe, at least for now. The spark had become a flame, and the flame had grown strong enough to challenge even the mightiest of foes. Mira understood that this was only the beginning. The galaxy still underestimated humans, but soon they would learn that courage, cleverness, and unity were as strong as any weapon. In the village, people slept with hope in their hearts. They had faced the Velan and survived. They had learned that strength was not only in machines or numbers, but in the mind and spirit of humans. Mira had led them to see that truth, and they would not forget it. The night wind carried a whisper across the fields. Mira stood, feeling it against her skin. It was not the wind of fear or of silence. It was the wind of change, of rising courage, of humans who would not be broken. The galaxy had thought she would stay small. The galaxy had thought her people would kneel. But Mira had proved them wrong. The tide had turned, and the fire of humanity now burned brighter than ever. The village had changed. The small hidden spark that Mira had started long ago had grown into a fire that no one could ignore. The Velan still remained, but their control was no longer absolute. The humans had tasted victory, and they would not return to fear. Mira stood on the hill outside the village, looking at the stars above. She remembered the first night she had climbed the hill as a child, dreaming of other worlds, of distant stars. Back then, she had been small, unseen, and forgotten. The galaxy had thought she would stay that way. They had thought she would bend, as her people had for generations. But Mira had grown, and she had learned that strength was not only in the body, but in courage, in knowledge, and in the fire that could burn even the strongest fear. The Velan commander had returned, furious and determined. He brought more troops, larger machines, and more ships. He believed he could crush the village once and for all. But Mira had prepared. She had studied their movements, their machines, their weaknesses. She had trained her people. And most importantly, she had taught them to believe. The villagers stood ready in the square. Men and women, young and old, carried tools, ropes, and whatever they could use as weapons. Children and elders helped guide the movement, signaling from rooftops and hiding paths through the streets. Every person knew their role. Every person knew that the Velan had underestimated them. Mira climbed onto the walker that had once been broken. She had repaired it, improved it, and learned its secrets. She could feel its power beneath her feet. It was not a perfect weapon, but it was human ingenuity made real. She had never felt more alive. The Velan arrived, their ships landing. With great noise, their guards moving like shadows, but they were not prepared for what awaited them. The humans moved as one, clever and determined. They had learned to use the environment, to create traps, to mislead and confuse the enemy. Every mistake the Velan made was used against them. Mira guided the walker through the streets. Its legs crushed barriers. Its arms lifted carts and obstacles to block the enemy. The villagers moved around it, striking at the Velan with ropes, tools, and courage. The aliens were powerful, but they could not anticipate human cunning, the unity of a people who refused to be broken. The commander shouted orders, his voice booming, but it was no longer enough. The humans had taken the initiative. They had turned fear into strength, chaos into strategy. The tide had shifted. From the rooftops, Mira saw groups of villagers leading the remaining guards into traps. They pushed carts into narrow alleys, forcing the Velan to retreat or fall. Sparks flew from damaged machines. Small fires burned, creating smoke and confusion. The humans used their environment and their cleverness to challenge an enemy that thought itself invincible. Mira realized that this battle was more than survival. It was proof. Proof that humans could rise against impossible odds. Proof that courage, unity, and cleverness could turn the strongest empire back. Proof that the galaxy's assumptions about them were wrong. In the center of the square, Mira saw the Veylan commander. He glared at her, realizing too late that his enemies were not shadows to be crushed. They were alive, thinking, and united. Mira raised her hand and signaled the villagers. They moved together, driving the Veylan back, toward their ships. The commander tried to regroup, but the humans had taken control. Their machines were damaged, their plans confused, and their confidence shaken. The villagers pressed forward with courage and skill. Every step was a declaration. Humans were no longer small. Humans were no longer silent. Mira leapt from the walker, landing with grace and confidence. She ran among her people, guiding, encouraging, and leading. They fought as one, their courage giving them strength greater than any machine. Slowly, the remaining Veylan began to retreat, realizing that the village was lost. The night sky lit with sparks and fires as the humans celebrated their victory. Mira stood on the hill again, watching the retreating ships and the remaining aliens disappear into the distance. The village was free. For the first time in generations, humans had defended their home and survived. But Mira did not stop at celebration. She gathered her people and spoke to them in the square. "Today, we have done what no one thought possible," she said. "The galaxy thought we would bend. They thought we would stay silent. They thought we were weak, but we are not. We are strong. We are clever. We are brave. And we will never let anyone take that from us again." The villagers cheered, their voices echoing across the hills. They had learned something far greater than victory. They had learned that courage could not be crushed, that hope could not be destroyed, and that even the smallest human could rise to challenge the strongest enemy. Mira looked at her people, her friends, her family, and she felt a quiet pride. She had been the unknown girl of a small village. Now she was a leader, a guide, and a symbol. Not because she wanted fame, but because she had chosen to stand, to act, and to inspire. The stars above shone brighter that night, as if acknowledging the courage of one small girl and her people. Mira felt the wind against her face and whispered softly, "We will rise. The galaxy will know our fire." Word of the village's victory spread quickly. Nearby settlements heard of the unknown girl who had led her people to defend their home. Humans in other worlds began to believe again. They realized that the galaxy had underestimated them, that courage and unity could defeat even the strongest powers. Mira returned to her book that night. She read the stories of humans who had faced impossible odds, who had fought, endured, and won. She understood now that she was part of that long line of humans. She whispered, "The galaxy thought I would bend. They were wrong. Humanity will rise." The village slept under a sky full of stars. Fires burned low, and the wind carried the quiet hum of hope. The Veylan would return, perhaps with more power, but the humans were ready. They had discovered their strength, their unity, and their courage. And they would not be broken again. Mira looked at the stars one last time before resting. The galaxy had thought she would be small, unseen, and powerless. The galaxy had thought her people would bend and obey. But the unknown girl had proven them wrong.